Xavier Zhang wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided yet another luxury sedan into the tight underground parking structure, his hands steady despite the exhaustion weighing on every muscle in his body. 3 years of working double shifts as a valet attendant had taught him to handle vehicles worth more than he would earn in a lifetime. And tonight was no exception as he carefully maneuvered a pristine silver Bentley into its designated spot, treating it with the same reverence he showed his own beat-up Honda Civic that sat in the employee lot with its check engine light perpetually glowing. The November rain had started again, turning the upscale hotel entrance into a chaotic dance of umbrellas and designer luggage. But Xavier moved through it all with practiced efficiency, his navy uniform somehow staying crisp despite the weather. At 32, he had the kind of face that showed every hard-won year, laugh lines around his eyes from smiling through difficulties, and a jaw that stayed perpetually tight from grinding his teeth through worry. His dark hair was starting to show the faintest threads of silver at the temples, premature gray that his 7-year-old daughter Mia liked to call his magic streaks, because she said they appeared when he used his superpowers to make her problems disappear. "Xavier, incoming black Mercedes, looks like corporate," his coworker Danny called out, gesturing toward the sleek vehicle pulling up to the entrance. Xavier nodded, already moving into position as the car came to a smooth stop under the covered portico. He opened the driver's door with his usual polite smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes anymore, but fooled most people into thinking he was just another happy service worker living his best life. The woman who stepped out made him forget his rehearsed greeting for just a moment. She was tall, probably 5'10" in the modest heels she wore, with dark hair pulled back into a severe bun that somehow made her look both intimidating and elegant. Her charcoal suit was clearly tailored, fitting her athletic frame perfectly, and when she glanced at him, her gray eyes held an intensity that felt like being studied under a microscope. She could not have been much older than him, maybe 35 at most, but she carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from never having to question whether she belonged in a room. "Thank you," she said, her voice smoother than expected, almost warm despite the businesslike exterior. She handed him the keys, and their fingers brushed for the briefest second, sending an unexpected jolt through his exhausted system that he immediately dismissed as nothing more than fatigue playing tricks on his mind. "My pleasure, miss. How long will you be staying with us?" Xavier asked automatically, already mentally cataloging where he would park her vehicle, how much tip she might leave, whether he could squeeze in his break soon to call and check on Mia. "Just tonight. I have meetings tomorrow morning." She paused, looking at him more directly now, her gaze dropping to the name tag pinned to his vest. "Xavier, that is a nice name." "Thank you, miss." He kept his professional smile in place, used to the occasional friendly comment from guests who were killing time before heading inside. "I will take excellent care of your car." She nodded, something flickering across her expression that he could not quite read, then turned toward the hotel entrance where a man in an expensive suit was already hurrying out to greet her with an enthusiasm that bordered on desperation. Xavier watched for just a second longer than necessary before sliding into the Mercedes, inhaling the scent of leather and subtle perfume that lingered in the interior. The dashboard was immaculate, not a single paper or coffee cup to suggest the vehicle was actually used rather than simply transported from one location to another. He drove carefully through the underground garage, finding her assigned spot with ease after years of memorizing the layout. The Mercedes purred like a contented cat, and he found himself appreciating the engineering even as he reminded himself not to get attached to things he would never own. That was a lesson he had learned the hard way, back when he thought he could give his ex-wife the life she wanted, back before she left him with a toddler and a stack of debt that still kept him up at night. The rest of his shift blurred together in the usual rhythm of opening doors, retrieving vehicles, accepting tips with grateful nods that hid how much he was calculating each dollar against his weekly budget. By the time midnight rolled around, his feet ached and his back protested every movement, but he still had 2 more hours before he could clock out and drive home to relieve the babysitter who was probably asleep on his couch by now. "Xavier, you got another Mercedes request," Danny said, checking the computer system at their small podium. "Same one from earlier. Guest is checking out." Xavier frowned, glancing at his watch. "At midnight. She said she had morning meetings," Danny shrugged. "Maybe they got canceled." "You want me to grab it?" "No, I have got it." Xavier jogged toward the garage, his curiosity piqued despite his better judgment. It was not unusual for guests to have sudden changes in plans, but something about the abrupt departure struck him as odd. He retrieved the Mercedes quickly, bringing it around to the front entrance where the same woman stood waiting, her phone pressed to her ear, and her expression tense in a way that made her earlier composure seem like a distant memory. "I do not care what he thinks, Marcus. The deal is off. I am not working with someone who sees my gender as a liability," she was saying, her voice clipped and angry. She ended the call abruptly as Xavier pulled up, shoving her phone into her purse with more force than necessary. "Leaving us already?" Xavier asked as he opened her door, keeping his tone light and non-judgmental, even though he was dying to know what had happened in the span of a few hours. She looked at him, and for just a moment, he saw past the armor she wore to something vulnerable and frustrated underneath. "Business did not go as planned. It happens. I am sorry to hear that." He meant it, which surprised him. Usually, he was too tired to feel much genuine emotion for the guests who passed through his nights like ships in fog. She studied him again with that same intense focus, then reached into her purse and pulled out a tip that made his eyes widen despite his attempt to stay neutral. It was a $100 bill, crisp and new, more than he typically made in tips over an entire shift. "Thank you for taking care of my car," she said, pressing it into his palm. "You were very careful with it. I noticed the way you adjusted the mirrors back to exactly how I had them." Xavier felt heat creep up his neck, embarrassed to be caught in his habit of memorizing vehicle settings. "Just trying to do a good job, Miss Theresa," she said suddenly. "My name is Theresa Evans, and you do more than a good job, Xavier. You treat every car like it matters, like it is yours. That is rare." He did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded, tucking the bill into his pocket where it felt like it was burning through the fabric. She climbed into her car, started the engine, then paused before driving away. "Do you work tomorrow night?" she asked through the open window. "I work every night, Miss Theresa," he corrected himself when she raised an eyebrow, something that might have been a smile crossed her face. "Then I will see you around, Xavier." She drove off into the rain, and Xavier stood there feeling like something significant had just happened even though he could not put his finger on what exactly it was. He shook his head, attributing it to exhaustion, and returned to his post where Danny was grinning at him knowingly. "Did you see that tip?" Danny whistled low. "Man, you got the magic touch tonight." "Just luck," Xavier muttered, but his fingers kept drifting to his pocket where the $100 bill rested against his thigh, a reminder that sometimes the universe threw you a bone when you least expected it. When he finally made it home at 2:30 in the morning, the babysitter was indeed asleep on his worn couch, and Mia was curled up in her bed with her favorite stuffed elephant clutched to her chest. Xavier paid the sitter, adding a little extra from his unexpected windfall, then collapsed into his own bed without bothering to change out of his clothes. His last thought before sleep claimed him was of gray eyes that saw too much and a voice that called him by his name like it mattered. He did not expect to see Theresa Evans again, but 3 nights later, the black Mercedes pulled up to the hotel entrance at exactly 11 o'clock, and she stepped out wearing jeans and a casual sweater that made her look younger and somehow more dangerous to his peace of mind. "Xavier," she greeted him, handing over her keys like they were old friends. "Still taking excellent care of expensive cars." "It is what I do," he replied, surprised by how genuinely pleased he was to see her. "Did your meetings get rescheduled?" Something like that. She grabbed a small overnight bag from the trunk, then hesitated. "Do you get a break? I could use some coffee and the hotel restaurant closes at midnight." Xavier blinked, certain he had misheard. "You want to get coffee with me? Unless you have somewhere else to be." She was watching him with an expression he could not quite decipher, something between hopeful and nervous that did not fit with the confident businesswoman he had met earlier. I get 15 minutes at midnight, he heard himself say, throwing caution to the wind because when was the last time an interesting, beautiful woman had invited him for coffee, even if it was just a friendly gesture born of boredom? Perfect. There is a diner 2 blocks down that stays open late. I will meet you there. She was already walking toward the hotel entrance, moving with purpose now that he had agreed. The next hour crawled by at an agonizing pace, as Xavier tried to focus on his work while his mind spun with questions and possibilities, and a healthy dose of suspicion about what angle she might be playing. Beautiful women did not ask exhausted valet attendants out for midnight coffee unless they wanted something, and he could not begin to imagine what someone like Theresa Evans could possibly need from someone like him. When midnight finally arrived, he told Danny he was taking his break and walked the 2 blocks to the diner with his heart hammering stupidly in his chest. She was already there, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee steaming on the table and an expression that suggested she was having second thoughts about the whole thing. "You came," she said as he slid into the seat across from her, sounding genuinely surprised. "You asked," he replied simply, wrapping his cold hands around the warm mug. "Though I have to admit I am pretty confused about why." Theresa laughed, a real sound that transformed her face into something breathtaking. "That makes 2 of us. I do not usually do things like this." "Things like what? Talk to the help." He kept his tone light, but there was an edge underneath that he could not quite hide. "No," she met his eyes directly. "Act on impulse. Do something because it feels right instead of because it makes logical sense." "You intrigue me, Xavier, and I have spent the last 3 days trying to talk myself out of coming back here to see you again." Xavier took a long sip of his coffee, buying himself time to process that statement. "I am not sure what is intriguing about a guy who parks cars for a living." "You are more than that." She leaned forward, her intensity focused entirely on him now. "The way you move, the way you treat everything with care, the fact that you look exhausted but you still smile at every person who hands you their keys. You work double shifts, do you not? Every night, sometimes into the morning. How did you know that?" He felt a flicker of unease, wondering if she had been checking up on him somehow. "I asked the concierge. I wanted to know more about the valet attendant who treated my car like it was made of glass." She held up a hand before he could respond. "I know how that sounds. I am not some creepy stalker, I promise. I am just someone who recognized something in you that I have not seen in a long time." "What is that?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Integrity. Strength. The kind of character that comes from fighting battles most people will never see." She wrapped her hands around her own mug. "I run a tech company, Xavier. Evans Industries. Maybe you have heard of it." He had, vaguely, the way you hear about companies that operate in a world so far removed from your own that they might as well be fictional. "You are that Theresa Evans, the CEO, guilty. I took over the company from my father 3 years ago, and I have spent every day since proving that I deserve to be there, that I am not just a legacy appointment who got the job because of her last name." She said it matter-of-factly, but he could hear the steel underneath. "I am good at reading people, Xavier. It is a survival skill in my world, and when I look at you, I see someone who understands what it means to fight for what matters." Xavier sat back, his mind reeling. "I park cars, Theresa. I am not fighting anything except exhaustion and bills." "Why do you work double shifts?" she pressed gently. He was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to share, but something about the way she looked at him made him want to be honest. "I have a daughter, Mia. She is 7. Her mother left when she was 2, and it has just been us ever since. Childcare is expensive, rent is expensive, everything is expensive when you are trying to give a kid a decent life on a valet salary. So I work nights when Mia is asleep, and I work as much as they will let me, and somehow we make it work." Theresa's expression softened into something that looked like understanding mixed with admiration. "You are a single father working yourself to death to provide for your daughter. That is not nothing, Xavier. That is everything." "It is just what you do," he muttered, uncomfortable with the praise even as part of him soaked it up like a man dying of thirst. "No, it is not. Most people find excuses, take shortcuts, compromise on what matters. You do not." She reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of touching his hand. I would like to get to know you better if you are open to that. Not as a CEO and a valet, but as two people who might have something to talk about. Xavier looked at her hand, so close to his, and felt the weight of temptation pulling at him. It had been so long since anyone had looked at him like he was worth knowing, worth pursuing. But reality crashed back in with the force of a cold wave. Theresa, I barely have time to sleep, let alone date. My life is work and Mia and more work. I cannot offer you anything except maybe another coffee at midnight between shifts. He hated how defeated he sounded, but it was the truth, and he had learned years ago that pretty lies only led to harder falls. Then we will have coffee at midnight, she said simply. And maybe sometimes we will talk on the phone when you have 5 minutes. And maybe, if this turns into something worth pursuing, we will figure out how to make more time because that is what people do when they care about each other. You do not even know me, he protested weakly. Not yet, but I would like to. She finally let her fingers brush against his knuckles, a feather light touch that sent electricity racing up his arm. I am not expecting anything, Xavier. I just know that walking away without exploring this, whatever this is, feels wrong, and I did not get where I am by ignoring my instincts. He should have said no. Every practical bone in his body was screaming at him to thank her politely and walk away before he got tangled up in something that could only end in disappointment. But when he opened his mouth, what came out was, "Okay, we can try coffee at midnight." Her smile was worth every alarm bell ringing in his head. They talked for the remaining 10 minutes of his break, and Xavier learned that Theresa had been working 80-hour weeks since taking over her company, that she had no social life to speak of, that she understood bone-deep exhaustion in a way most people in her tax bracket never would. She learned that he used to be an auto mechanic before the divorce decimated his finances, that he had always been good with his hands, that his daughter was the single best thing in his life, even when she made him want to tear his hair out with frustration. When he had to leave, she walked back toward the hotel with him, their shoulders almost touching in the cold night air. At the entrance, she stopped and looked at him with an expression that made his breath catch. "Same time in 3 days, she asked. "You are coming back." He could not keep the surprise out of his voice. "I am coming back." She said it like a promise, and Xavier felt something dangerous bloom in his chest, something that felt suspiciously like hope. Over the next 3 weeks, Theresa became a fixture in his midnight routine, showing up every few days with an excuse about needing to stay in the city for meetings or wanting a change of scenery from her penthouse apartment across town. They fell into an easy pattern of late-night coffee at the diner, 15-minute conversations that felt both too short and too revealing, text messages exchanged during the rare moments when Xavier had his phone nearby and his hands free. He learned that she was brilliant and driven and unexpectedly funny, with a dry wit that caught him off guard and made him laugh in a way he had almost forgotten was possible. She learned that he was thoughtful and protective and carried guilt like a second skin, always worried he was not doing enough for his daughter, not being enough as a father, as a provider, as a man. They talked about everything and nothing, and somewhere in the midst of stolen moments and careful conversations, Xavier realized he was falling for her in a way that terrified him. "You should meet Mia," he said one night, the words escaping before he could think better of them. Theresa looked up from her coffee, her eyes widening slightly. "You want me to meet your daughter, eventually, maybe, if this keeps going the way it is going." He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling exposed and vulnerable. "She is the most important person in my life, Theresa. If we are doing this, really doing this, then she is part of the equation." "I would love to meet her," Theresa said softly, and the sincerity in her voice made his chest ache. "When you are ready, when she is ready, I would be honored." That weekend, Xavier arranged for his sister to watch Mia for a few hours so he could take Theresa to dinner, their first real date outside the confines of midnight coffee and stolen moments. He picked her up at her building, driving his beat-up Honda with the check engine light glowing like a beacon of embarrassment. But Theresa climbed in without hesitation, her hand finding his on the gear shift like it was the most natural thing in the world. The restaurant was nothing fancy, a small Italian place he had been saving up to take Mia to for her birthday, but the food was good and the atmosphere was warm. And for 3 hours, Xavier let himself exist in a bubble where his life was not defined by exhaustion and financial struggle. They talked about childhoods and dreams, failures and victories, the ways life had shaped them into who they were. "I need to tell you something," Theresa said as they shared tiramisu for dessert, her expression turning serious. "About why I keep coming back to that hotel, why I am making excuses to stay in the city when I have a perfectly good home 20 minutes away." Xavier's stomach clenched with anxiety, convinced she was about to reveal some terrible secret that would shatter the fragile thing growing between them. "Okay. It is because of you, just you. There is no business, no meetings that require me to stay overnight. I keep booking that hotel because I want to see you, because midnight coffee in a diner has become the best part of my week, and I needed you to know that I am all in on this, Xavier." Completely, terrifyingly all in. Relief flooded through him so intensely he almost laughed. "I thought you were going to say you were married or moving to another country or something equally catastrophic. God, no. Just hopelessly falling for a valet attendant who treats me like a person instead of a title." She reached across the table, lacing her fingers through his. "But I am worried, Xavier. I am worried that my world is going to crush what we have. That the media attention, the expectations, the sheer insanity of dating someone in my position is going to be too much. I am worried that I cannot give you what you deserve," he admitted, squeezing her hand. "That I am going to disappoint you, that the reality of my life is going to wear you down until you realize you can do so much better than a broke single dad with no prospects. You are not allowed to decide what I deserve," Theresa said firmly. "That is my choice and I choose you. I choose late-night coffee and text messages at weird hours and the way you look at me like I hung the moon. I choose all of it, Xavier, if you are willing to let me in." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the restaurant with the dessert half-eaten between them, and it felt like sealing a pact, like stepping off a cliff and trusting that someone would catch him. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "I am willing. I am terrified, but I am willing." 2 weeks later, Theresa met Mia on a Sunday afternoon at the park, and Xavier watched with his heart in his throat as his daughter sized up this woman who had somehow become central to his life. Mia was at that age where she was equal parts innocent and observant, and Xavier knew she would see right through any attempt at deception or false cheerfulness. "You are very tall," Mia announced after studying Theresa for a full minute. Theresa laughed, crouching down to be at eye level with the little girl. "I am. Your dad tells me you are very smart." "I am the best reader in my class," Mia said proudly, "and I can do multiplication up to 12 times 12. That is impressive. I bet you work hard at school." "Dad says working hard is important. He works really hard." Mia glanced at Xavier, her expression turning serious in a way that made her look older than 7. "Are you going to be his girlfriend?" Xavier started to intervene, but Theresa held up a hand, keeping her attention on Mia. "I would like to be if that is okay with you, but I want you to know that nothing is more important to your dad than you. You come first always." Mia considered this, then nodded decisively. "Okay, but if you hurt him, I will be very angry." "That is completely fair," Theresa agreed solemnly, and Xavier fell a little more in love with both of them in that moment. The afternoon went better than he could have hoped, with Mia warming up to Theresa quickly as they played on the swings and fed the ducks and talked about everything from school projects to favorite ice cream flavors. By the time they left, Mia was holding Theresa's hand with the casual trust of a child who had decided someone was safe, and Xavier felt tears prick his eyes at the sight. "She is amazing," Theresa told him later that night over the phone, after Mia had gone to bed and Xavier had finally collapsed onto his couch. "You have done such a good job with her, Xavier. She is kind and smart and so full of life." "She liked you," he said, still marveling at how smoothly the meeting had gone. "She does not usually warm up to people that fast. I liked her too, so much." There was a pause, then Theresa's voice came through softer, more vulnerable. "I can see us doing this, Xavier, being a family." "Is that crazy?" "Probably," he admitted. "But I can see it too." As winter turned to spring, their relationship deepened in ways Xavier had not known were possible. Theresa became a constant presence in their lives, showing up at Mia's school events and helping with homework on the nights when Xavier was working late. She never tried to replace Mia's mother, never overstepped boundaries, but she carved out her own space in their small family with a grace that left Xavier constantly amazed. The media attention started around the 3-month mark, when someone recognized Theresa at one of Mia's soccer games and posted about it online. Within days, Xavier found himself the subject of speculation and gossip, labeled everything from a gold digger to a lucky everyman who had won the lottery. Theresa handled it with the practiced ease of someone used to living in the public eye, but Xavier felt exposed in a way that made his skin crawl. "They are calling me your boy toy," he told her one night, showing her some particularly cruel headlines on his phone. "Saying you are slumming it, having a midlife crisis, using me for some kind of publicity stunt." Theresa took his phone and set it aside, then pulled him close until his head was resting on her shoulder. "The media does not know anything about us, about what we have. Their opinions do not matter, Xavier. They say I am with you for your money, that I am taking advantage of you." His voice cracked on the last word, and he hated how much the accusations hurt even though he knew they were not true. "Hey, look at me." She tilted his chin up, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You are the least opportunistic person I have ever met. You did not even know who I was when we met, and you have never asked me for a single thing. Anyone who knows you for 5 minutes can see that you are genuine, that what we have is real. What if this ruins your reputation, your business?" The fear had been eating at him for days, the worry that being with him was somehow damaging everything she had worked so hard to build. "Then it ruins it. I am not giving you up, Xavier. Not for optics, not for business, not for anything." She said it with such fierce certainty that he almost believed her. "We are going to get through this together, okay? You, May, and Mia. A team." They weathered the storm of media attention, and gradually, the headlines shifted from salacious gossip to something more positive as the press realized there was no scandal to uncover, just two people who genuinely cared about each other. Theresa's company did not suffer, and if anything, her willingness to be open about her relationship made her more relatable to the public. 6 months into their relationship, Theresa approached Xavier with a proposal that both excited and terrified him. "I want to invest in you. Not give you money, but actually invest in a business. You mentioned once that you used to be a mechanic, that you were good at it. What if we opened a shop together? A high-end auto restoration place, something that plays to your strengths." Xavier stared at her, certain he had misheard. "Theresa, I cannot let you fund some business for me. That is exactly what the media said I was after. This is not charity, Xavier. It is a legitimate business opportunity. I have done the research, looked at the market, and there is a real gap for quality restoration work in this city. You would be doing the work, building the business. I would just be providing startup capital, same as any investor." She pulled out a folder full of documents, clearly having thought this through extensively. "But if you are not interested, if you are happy doing what you are doing, I will never bring it up again." He was not happy doing what he was doing. He was exhausted and frustrated and desperate for something more, but he had buried those feelings so deep he had almost forgotten they existed. The idea of working with cars again, of building something that was his, sent a thrill through him that he had not felt in years. "I would need to think about it," he said carefully. "Talk to Mia, make sure this is the right move. Take all the time you need." Theresa kissed his temple. "I am not going anywhere." Mia's response, when he finally brought it up, was enthusiastic and immediate. "You should do it, Dad. You are always so happy when you are fixing things. Remember when you fixed Mrs. Chen's car and you were singing the whole time?" He had forgotten about that, forgotten how much joy he used to find in the simple act of understanding how things worked and making them better. With Theresa's support and Mia's encouragement, Xavier took the leap, giving notice at the hotel and throwing himself into building something new. The transition was not easy. There were permits to obtain and equipment to purchase, and 1,000 small decisions that kept him up at night with worry. But Theresa was there every step of the way, offering advice when he asked for it and backing off when he needed to figure things out himself. She understood the delicate balance of supporting him without diminishing his accomplishment, and he loved her even more for that sensitivity. Zhang Restoration opened on a sunny morning in July, almost exactly a year after Xavier had first met Theresa at the hotel entrance. The shop was small but impeccably organized, with space for 4 vehicles and all the equipment he needed to do the kind of detailed, careful work that had always been his specialty. Mia cut the ribbon with oversized scissors, beaming with pride, while Theresa stood next to Xavier with her hand in his and an expression that told him she was just as nervous as he was about whether this would succeed. The first few months were slow, but word spread about the quality of his work, and soon Xavier found himself with more business than he could handle alone. He hired 2 employees, both skilled mechanics who shared his passion for doing things right rather than doing them fast. The shop began to develop a reputation, and Xavier discovered that he was actually good at running a business, at managing people and solving problems and building something that mattered. "I am proud of you," Theresa told him one night as they sat in his small office going over the books. "Look at what you have built, Xavier. This is all you." "It is us," he corrected, pulling her close. "I could not have done any of this without you believing in me, giving me a chance. You would have found another way. Maybe it would have taken longer, but you would have gotten here because you are stubborn and talented and refuse to give up." She kissed him softly. "But I am glad I got to be part of the journey." As the business stabilized and grew, Xavier found himself with something he had not had in years: actual free time. He used it to be more present for Mia, attending every school event and soccer practice, taking her on weekend adventures that did not revolve around him catching up on sleep. He used it to build a real relationship with Theresa, one that included lazy Sunday mornings and actual dates that happened before midnight. They moved in together just before Mia's 9th birthday, finding a house that was big enough for all of them but cozy enough to still feel like home. Mia got her own room with space for all her books and art supplies, and Xavier got a garage where he could work on personal projects when the mood struck. Theresa transformed one room into a home office but made a point of leaving work at work most of the time, prioritizing the family they were building together. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Mia said one evening as Xavier was tucking her into bed. "Always, baby girl. What is on your mind?" "Are you going to marry Theresa?" She asked it with the blunt directness of a child who saw no reason to dance around the topic. Xavier's heart stuttered in his chest. "Would you want me to?" Mia nodded seriously. "She makes you happy, and she is nice to me but not in a fake way. Plus, she does not mind when I beat her at board games," he laughed, ruffling her hair. "Those are all very good points. What would you think if I asked her?" "I think you should. But you should probably get her a ring. That is how it works in movies." Mia yawned, snuggling deeper into her blankets. "Can I help pick it out?" "Absolutely." He kissed her forehead. "Sleep tight, Mia. Love you, Dad. You are doing a good job." She said it sleepily, already half dreaming, but the words hit him right in the chest with the force of everything he had been working toward for the past 9 years. 2 weeks later, Xavier took Mia to a jewelry store, and together they picked out a ring that was elegant and understated, with a single diamond set in platinum that caught the light in ways that reminded him of Theresa's eyes. He planned the proposal carefully, wanting it to be special but not over the top, something that reflected who they actually were rather than some romantic ideal. He chose a Saturday evening in the park, where they had first introduced Theresa to Mia, the same spot where his daughter had decided this woman was safe to let into their lives. Mia was in on the plan, barely containing her excitement as they spread out a picnic blanket and unpacked the dinner Xavier had spent all afternoon preparing. "This is nice," Theresa said, settling onto the blanket with a contented sigh. "We should do this more often." "We should," Xavier agreed, his heart hammering as he tried to remember the speech he had practiced. "Theresa, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, her expression shifting to concern at his serious tone. "Okay, is everything all right? Everything is perfect, that is the thing. 2 years ago, I was exhausted and barely keeping my head above water, convinced that the best I could hope for was surviving each day. And then you walked into my life and changed everything." He took her hand, aware that Mia was watching them with barely suppressed glee. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You loved my daughter like she was your own. You built a life with us, not because it was easy or convenient, but because you chose us every single day. Xavier, Theresa whispered, her eyes already filling with tears. I do not have fancy words or grand gestures. I just have this truth. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. You made me remember that I am more than just a struggling dad trying to survive. You helped me become the man I always wanted to be. He pulled the ring box from his pocket, opening it to reveal the diamond that sparkled in the fading sunlight. Theresa Evans, will you marry me? Yes, she breathed, and then louder, laughing through her tears, yes, absolutely yes. Mia cheered as Xavier slipped the ring onto Theresa's finger, and then they were all hugging, a tangle of arms and laughter and happy tears. Other park-goers applauded, but Xavier barely noticed, too focused on the woman in his arms and the daughter bouncing with excitement beside them. I get to be in the wedding, right? Mia demanded, and they both laughed. You are going to be the most important person there besides us, Theresa assured her, pulling Mia into another hug. We could not do this without you, sweetheart. They married 6 months later in a ceremony that was intimate and joyful, with only their closest friends and family in attendance. Mia stood between them during the vows, her hands clasped in theirs, because she was not just witnessing their union but becoming an essential part of it. Xavier's vows made half the guests cry, simple words about second chances and the power of showing up for the people you love. Theresa's vows were equally moving, a promise to honor the family they had built together and to never take for granted the gift of Xavier's trust and love. The years that followed were not without challenges. The shop had its ups and downs, and Theresa's company faced obstacles that required long hours and difficult decisions. Mia went through the rocky years of adolescence, testing boundaries and pushing back in ways that made Xavier want to tear his hair out. But they faced it all together, a team united by love and commitment and the determination to build something lasting. When Mia was 15, Theresa officially adopted her in a courthouse ceremony that left everyone in tears. It was not about changing Mia's last name or erasing her history, but about formally recognizing what had been true for years. They were a family in every way that mattered. I never thought I would have this, Xavier told Theresa that night as they lay in bed, exhausted but happy. A business I love, a wife who challenges me to be better, a daughter who is thriving. Sometimes I feel like I am going to wake up and discover it was all a dream. It is real, Theresa murmured, her head on his chest. We built this together, Xavier. Every day, every choice, every moment of showing up for each other. That is what makes it real. By the time Mia left for college, Xavier and Theresa had expanded Zhang Restoration into 3 locations, each one maintaining the commitment to quality and craftsmanship that had made the original shop successful. Xavier still worked on cars himself most days, unwilling to give up the hands-on work that brought him joy, but he had learned to delegate and trust his team. Theresa had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Evans Industries, transitioning to a chairman role that allowed her more flexibility and time with family. Together, they had created a life that balanced ambition with presence, success with contentment, always remembering that what mattered most was not what they accomplished, but who they did it with. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they returned to the hotel where they had first met, booking the same room Theresa had stayed in all those years ago. The valet who took their car was young and eager, reminding Xavier so much of his younger self that it was almost painful. Take good care of it, Theresa told the valet with a smile. And remember, you never know what doors might open just from doing your job well. The young man nodded, probably thinking she was just another eccentric guest, and Xavier wrapped his arm around his wife as they walked into the hotel. Do you ever miss it? Theresa asked as they rode the elevator up. That life before everything changed, not for a second, Xavier replied honestly. That version of me was surviving. This version of me, the one I became with you, is actually living. There is no comparison. They spent the evening reminiscing about those early days, the midnight coffee dates and stolen moments, the terror and exhilaration of falling in love against all odds. They talked about Mia, now thriving at university and pursuing her own dreams with the same determination that had defined both her parents. They talked about the future, about growing old together, about maybe selling the businesses someday and traveling the world they had been too busy to explore. "I need to tell you something," Xavier said as they sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights. "That night we met, when you handed me your keys, I thought you were just another guest, someone passing through my life for a few hours before disappearing forever. I never imagined you would become everything." "I knew," Theresa said softly. "Not that we would end up here, not specifically, but I knew there was something about you, something that pulled at me in a way nothing else had. I recognized a kindred spirit, someone who understood what it meant to fight for what mattered. I could not walk away from that from you." "I am glad you came back," Xavier whispered. "I am glad you kept coming back until I was brave enough to let you in." "I would have kept coming back forever if that is what it took." She leaned against him, her hand finding his in the darkness. "You were worth waiting for, Xavier, worth fighting for, worth building a whole life around." They sat there in comfortable silence, watching the city pulse with life below them, and Xavier thought about the unexpected paths that had led them to this moment. He thought about the younger version of himself who had been so certain his life was already mapped out, defined by struggle and limitation. He thought about taking a chance on midnight coffee with a stranger, about daring to believe that he deserved something more than just survival. Most of all, he thought about love, the real kind that showed up in mundane moments and hard conversations, and the choice to keep choosing each other through everything life threw at them. The kind of love that transformed a struggling dad parking cars into a man who built a business and a family and a life worth celebrating. "I love you," he said into the quiet night, the words as true as the first time he had spoken them. "I love you too," Theresa replied, and in those simple words was the story of everything they had become together, everything they would continue to build for all the years ahead. Years later, when people asked Xavier how he had gone from valet attendant to successful business owner, from barely surviving to genuinely thriving, he always told them the same thing. He had met someone who saw him, really saw him, and believed he was worth investing in. Not just with money, though that had certainly helped, but with time and patience and the kind of love that changes everything. But the truth, the deeper truth he carried in his heart, was that Theresa had not saved him. She had given him the support and belief he needed to save himself, to remember who he was beneath the exhaustion and fear. She had been his partner in building a life, not his rescuer, and that distinction made all the difference. Together, they proved that love was not about grand gestures or fairy tale transformations. It was about showing up, day after day, choosing each other through the boring parts and the hard parts and the beautiful parts. It was about building something real from midnight coffee and careful trust, from vulnerability and courage, and the willingness to take a chance on something that felt right even when logic suggested otherwise. And in the end, that was the greatest gift Xavier could have asked for. Not a life without struggle, but a partner to face those struggles beside, a family to make it all worthwhile, and the knowledge that he was loved exactly as he was, valet uniform and calloused hands and all. Their story was not about a CEO swooping in to save a struggling dad. It was about two people who recognized something essential in each other and built a life from that recognition, one choice at a time, one day at a time, until those choices and days added up to something extraordinary. It was about protection and care flowing both ways, about partnership and equality, and the transformative power of being truly seen by another person. Xavier Zhang had protected Theresa's car that first night, treating it with the respect and care he showed everything in his life. But in the years that followed, they had learned to protect each other, to care for the dreams and fears and hopes they each carried. They had learned that love was not about one person saving another, but about two people choosing to walk through life together, facing whatever came with equal parts strength and vulnerability. And as they grew old together, watching Mia build her own beautiful life and eventually welcoming grandchildren who filled their home with laughter and chaos. Xavier never forgot the night a woman in a Mercedes had asked him if he wanted coffee. He never forgot the courage it took to say yes, to open himself up to possibility when every instinct screamed at him to protect his heart. Because that single yes had led to everything, to the family surrounding him and the business that bore his name, and the life he had built with the woman who had seen past the valet uniform to the man underneath. That yes had been the beginning of his forever, and he would spend the rest of his days grateful that he had been brave enough to take the chance. Their love story was not conventional, but it was real and hard won, and worth every moment of fear and faith it had taken to build. It was proof that sometimes the universe conspired to put the right people in your path at exactly the right moment, and that being open to those moments, however unexpected they might be, could change everything. Xavier had started as a struggling dad in a valet uniform, protecting expensive cars for people whose lives seemed impossibly distant from his own. But he had ended up as a man who was genuinely happy, surrounded by love and purpose, and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful. And it had all begun with a woman who had wanted him forever from the moment she saw how carefully he treated the things that had been entrusted to him, even when no one was watching. That care, that integrity, that fundamental decency had been what Theresa recognized and fell in love with. And in loving him, she had helped him see those qualities in himself, to believe that he was worth more than just surviving each day. Together, they had built a forever neither of them had dared to dream of, and that forever was still unfolding, still surprising them with new joys and challenges and reasons to be grateful they had found each other. In the end, Xavier's story was a testament to the power of showing up fully in your own life, of doing your best even when no one seemed to notice, of staying open to possibility even when circumstances suggested you should guard your heart. It was about second chances and chosen family, and the beautiful, messy reality of building a life with someone who chose to see the best in you every single day, forever.